As I conclude, I ask that as we consider whether or how to act, we also consider what happens if we don't act. What happens if Canada does not do everything in its power to stop this barbarism?
That's the Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird at a special committee on Canada's engagement in Iraq. That took place this morning. He was grilled by critics. So was the Defence Minister, Rob Nicholson. So was the Chief of the Defence Staff, General Lawson, plus the Ambassador for Religious Freedom, Andrew Bennett, all answering MPs' questions. The fact is, though, after watching it, many of the details of this new mission are very unclear. Most importantly, the question, what's the military's goal in Iraq? What would success look like? President Obama is supposed to speak about this tomorrow. The closest we got today, stop ISIS, provide Kurdish and Iraqi forces with support. But how long will that take? We know military advisors are set to be in Iraq for 30 days at this point, but we don't even know how many. Is Canada going to be in Iraq for the long run? What would a successful mission in that country actually look like? Let's find out. Joining me now, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence, James Bezan, the NDP Defence critic, Jack Harris, and the Liberal Foreign Affairs critic, Mark Garneau. Good to see you all today. The question that you put to the ministers is an important one, Mr. Bezan. Let me start with you. It was a little unclear listening to Minister Nicholson what the goal of this mission will be and what exactly Canadian troops will be actually doing there. So let's start at the beginning. What is the goal of sending Canadian troops to Iraq?
Well, I think both Minister Nicholson and Minister Baird articulated it fairly well today, is that we want to ensure that we can bring about some level of security within the region so that we can protect those ethnic and religious minorities that have been terrorized and victimized and brutalized by ISIL, and deliver humanitarian aid into the hands of those people that so desperately need it. So that is the main goal. So we're going to be there in a non-combat role, providing advice and strategic analytical data, along with the military forces in northern Iraq, so that we can ensure that they have some chain of command and success in the field as they confront ISIL.
I get it. You and I, that's pretty vague, because, you know, the U.S. is saying they want to dismantle ISIS or ISIL, whatever you want to call this group. Canada says we want to help deliver aid. So we don't know for how long. There's a 30-day sort of marker to rethink it, but, you know, in 30 days you could barely unpack and set up camp, right? So how long does this go? Can you give us any details? Exactly how many troops are on the ground? We heard 100. We've heard now at the conference today a couple of dozen. How many exactly?
Well, we're talking, as always, it's about several dozen. And until we have the final agreements in place with the Iraqi government, that all the diplomatic papers are signed, and the need is identified, so we know which different I guess from the standpoint of work capabilities are required by the military in northern Iraq, will be then determining exactly who goes. We got 4 people over there now, as was mentioned, who are doing that assessment.
Well, why can't Canadians know how many? I mean, is it 50? Is
because
it 20?
that decision hasn't been made yet.
Okay.
And so those 4 individuals that are there, along with the discussions that we're having government to government, will determine the amount of people that will deploy. And we said it's going to be several dozen, but it's going to be based upon the need, rather than just sending over a bulk container full of troops and saying this is what we're doing. We're sending over people that can provide the right strategic advice, the right leadership, and have the right skill set for the situation that we're dealing in, counterinsurgency and liberating the people who have been under the control of ISIL.
Okay, Jack Harris, you're shaking your head. What's your concern about what
I'm shaking my head because we went there this morning expecting to have some clarity. And what we got instead, they wouldn't tell us when these troops are being deployed. They wouldn't tell us how many. They're using, there's not security reasons. We didn't ask for the flight numbers as the minister suggested. We just want to know, is this happening next week or 2 weeks' time? I mean, we're asking for a parliamentary debate and a vote. That's what the Prime Minister campaigned to be Prime Minister on. And I'll quote you the campaign platform. Parliament must be responsible for the commitment of Canadian forces to foreign operations. Well, we agree with that. In fact, a year before that, Jack Layton and Stephen Harper signed a memorandum asking for changes to the standing orders of the House of Commons to ensure that would happen. So we're asking for that. What we got today was total vagueness on what the what's going to happen after 30 days, and they won't commit to a parliamentary debate and a vote. And we can't believe that this is not going to go on longer than 30 days.
But does the NDP support sending, there's a humanitarian side, I know you've talked about, what about a military side?
We think at this point, I mean, you know, Paul Dewar, along with Mr. Baird and Mark Garneau, and he can verify this, I'm sure, nobody asked in Iraq, whether it was the president of Iraq or the president of the Kurdish regional government, for boots on the ground or for military assistance there. They were looking desperately for help with the humanitarian crisis, the 850,000 plus people who have been
But the U.S. president has asked for it.
The U.S. president asked. We don't even have the consent of the Iraqi government yet. So why we're just saying, go and seek the consent of the Canadian public through its parliament, and do it that way, which you said you would, and lay out what the mission is. If you don't know how many, it took Mark Garneau to make a paraphrase suggesting today to the minister, well, let me say... Well,
let me show you what the minister said, just so folks can...
He just said yes when he paraphrased it. I thought it was a bit of a joke, really.
Well, here's what Mr. Nicholson said, the defense minister, when he was asked about the goals at committee. Check this out.
We're going to assess what's actually happening on the ground. And again, we will do this in cooperation with our allies, and we'll want to see if we're making a difference. I think appropriately, for caution's sake, we will analyze exactly what has happened after approximately 30 days. This is an ongoing crisis that changes very quickly, as you know, and so I think it's entirely appropriate that we, on a regular basis, analyze exactly what it is we are doing.
Okay, Mr. Garneau, you asked about the goals, the mission, and what you're doing there. Those are some of the answers the defense minister gave. Are you satisfied with the parameters that the government has set out or not?
Well, my main focus today was on clarity, and I accept the fact, as an ex-military, that some of the details have not been worked out. This is a very complex operation. We can't be told there's going to be 48 people going on this date to this place to do exactly this. Some of these things are being worked out as we speak, but I did want clarity on two principal questions. The first was, are you going to assure us that our troops are going to be behind the wire? Because this is supposedly a non-combat role in an advisory capacity. And secondly, if you're going to change anything from what you've defined right now, will you make sure that Parliament is informed? I was satisfied today in committee that we're going to be notified if there are any changes, and that our troops will stay behind the line. So that initial concern has been addressed. However, there are still a lot of details that we don't know about.
You know, the big question is what they call mission creep. There's this 30-day benchmark. I asked John Baird on the program, are you concerned about that? He said, if you're fearful of mission creep and everything, you'll do nothing. Here's what Minister Nicholson said about the fear that this begins as a couple dozen people in an advisory role and it starts morphing into something much more dramatic. Check this out.
We have to deploy and assist people where we can, and again, it's not a question of mission creep. Otherwise, we wouldn't be there to help anybody if that was always hanging over our head.
I mean, I appreciate this notion that mission creep shouldn't be, the fear of it shouldn't lead to paralysis. But the U.S. is talking about 3 years. Tomorrow, Obama's going to announce a strategy. Clearly, Canada is doing this at the behest of Mr. Obama, so you're going to be linked to what the U.S. is going to be. How can Canadians be reassured that what begins as a couple dozen people advising the Kurds doesn't morph into something that John Baird has described as the great struggle of our generation?
Well, Evan, I guess there's a number of things at play here. One, going back to some of the stuff that Jack was talking about, we're just into a brand new Iraqi government. They only got sworn in just yesterday. And so that's some of the reasons why there were still some of these negotiations outstanding. We definitely want to ensure, and that's why we got the 30-day review in place, is that we want to make sure that when we understand what's happening on the ground, that we're able to move forward and assist as possible, and then make decisions in the right context here in Canada on how we go forward. If we need to expand, whether we withdraw, whatever those decisions are, they have to be made in the right context.
But that's interesting. So you're saying whether to expand or whether to withdraw. In other words, all those options, just so Canadians are aware, it's all on the table. This could grow or this could shrink, but you're not ruling those out.
anything in the military world always changes, and if we look at where everything was 6 months ago to where we are today, things have changed dramatically in the world. And so the demands upon the Canadian Armed Forces and the brave men and women who serve us is really this whole catalyst is taking place that changes.
Civilian oversight determines where the military goes. It's your job to figure out.
And that's why the 30-day review. That's why we have mechanisms within Parliament, such as question period, emergency debates, take note debates, as well as regular opposition days to discuss how we move forward with the Canadian Armed Forces and our involvement in Iraq and how we feel about the situation on the ground.
But Evan, we came today to look for answers, and we're finding that what we've got is questions. Oh, we don't know. This is too early. Well, it's going to take 30 days perhaps to figure out what the heck the government is actually proposing to do by the sounds of this. So why don't we wait that 30 days or however long it takes? If it takes 2 weeks, we don't even know when they're going.
But sir, that ISIS might be moving at different speeds than you.
They might be, but this is about what contribution. What's the best way for Canada to help the Iraqi people right now? And we do know that there's a huge humanitarian crisis. There's 800,000+ people who are totally homeless with the clothes on their back that need desperate help. And what we were saying today, one of the things we were saying today, is that something concrete that we can say, yes, we can focus on that and do something immediate about that. Obviously we do have to make if there's going to be some involvement, there has to be plans. But those plans, when they're ready, should be put before Parliament and a decision made in Parliament as our policy says, and apparently the Harper government policy said when it got elected to government. So we're ignoring all that. We've got a thin edge of the wedge, and we've got a little bit of a slippery slope, frankly, because we don't know. We're being asked to endorse something.
Well, let's say what you're ruling out.
We're not ruling out anything at this point. We're talking about.
Would you rule out airstrikes?
We're talking about a slippery slope right now.
Okay, so let's see what you're ruling out. Everyone says no boots on the ground. That expression is clearly confusing because there are clearly boots on the ground. The question is, are they going to be in combat role? Let's talk about air support. Like in Libya, would your party, Mr. Harris or Mr. Garneau, would you rule out if Canada decided to participate in airstrikes on ISIS, for example, in the north?
We're not picking a menu here. This is up to the government to determine what it wants to propose. And we respond to that. Right now, we're getting nothing other than vague comments about a so-called no boots on the ground. Yet they're not going to take their boots off when they land. So it's all very foolish metaphors that we're dealing with here. They're saying it's a non-combat role, but as Mark knows and Paul Dewar told me, they were in sight of the ISIS people who were almost within gunshot of sniper fire. So there's no front line as such or wire.
But to be fair, I want Mr. Garneau in, but to be fair, you're the official opposition. You said you support humanitarian end, but on the military end, your party has been unclear. What kind of military action would you support? Mr. Garneau said he would support some kind of military action. I'll get some details. Mr. Bezan has clearly said that. What about the NDP?
Well, we do have a military for a reason, but we don't want to see Canada go down some slippery slope like, 10 years ago, we could have gone down the Iraq route with Mr. Bush. And if Mr. Harper were in power at the time, he would have taken us there. We didn't. We went into Afghanistan. We were there for more than 10 years. I don't think we want to be in some place where we don't know exactly what we're doing or how far we're going. If we have a clear path, if we have a clear goal and a clear end game, then I think it's something that we can look at. But if we don't have that, then I don't think we can give a blank check to anybody, whether it be this part of the menu or that part of the menu.
Fair enough. Mr. Garneau, what about you? Given the fact that it's difficult to get clarity on the goal, the length of time, is this the slippery slope, as Mr. Harris said? Would your party support any kind of military action if it's not combat troops on the ground? What about air support in the way that Canada participated in the Libyan crisis?
What we said very clearly today is that we're prepared to support what is being proposed by the government at this time, which is to be an advisory group in a non-combat role. We'll review the situation in 30 days. And bear in mind there's a bigger picture as well, Evan, because this country is also engaging us partially on the NATO front in Europe. So there are only so many forces, assets, and so all of that has to be taken into account.
All right, I got 30 seconds real quick. Yesterday, two Russian jets and a Russian surveillance plane flew low over the Canadian frigate HMCS Toronto as it was on NATO maneuvers in international waters in the Black Sea. Today, the Russians are denying this flyover. it has been described as a very provocative act. Mr. Bezan, any follow-up on that? The Russians deny it. What's the Canadian reaction?
Well, it's unfortunate that they denied it because we know exactly what happened. It's well documented, and as well, we've heard that there's been other NATO vessels that have also been buzzed in the Black Sea. So it's unfortunate that the Russians believe that the Black Sea is only their territory. It's international waters where they're in exercises with other neighboring states that border the Black Sea, such as Romania, Georgia, and Turkey, and Ukraine. And we're going to continue on having these international exercises, such as Exercise Sea Breeze, with our NATO allies and our partners in the Black Sea region to ensure that we have interoperability and show that we aren't going to tolerate Russian aggression in the region.
Any reaction to this? Are tensions going up, or is this, I mean, it did seem like a very Cold War moment to me, Jack Harris.
Well, it doesn't look, the idea that the Russians are denying it is pretty stupid in the face of reality. So they would probably suggest that there was a provocation of having these maneuvers in the Black Sea. So it's kind of a tit-for-tat sort of thing. I don't know whether it means anything other than these kinds of maneuvers that people do. It's not a good sign, though.
And I can't remember the last time that the Russians actually said something that was truthful.
Exactly.
In the whole Ukrainian debacle that's been going on now for about 8 months, they never tell the truth. Standard operating procedures. In this particular case, buzzing the HMCS Toronto, again, standard operating procedures, and I'm not surprised that they're denying it.
All right, I got to leave it there. Lots going on in both these files. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence, James Bezan, Defence critic for the NDP, Jack Harris, and Liberal Foreign Affairs critic, Mark Garneau. Thanks, gents.
Thanks, Evan.